Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Tulsi Maharani Jaya Vrindadevi
Vachahi Namo Namaha. Jai Tulsi Maharani ki Jai. We offer our most respectful obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, who are just like desire trees, who can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Jai. Panchakapatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyeva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. No. What's Thursday? I don't think we ever have a meeting on Thursday.
Some astrological reason for that?
It's not auspicious. Bugs? All right. No, I don't think we ever have a meeting on Thursday. It's working. Very well. All right. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. That's good. Jayo Radha Madhava Kunna Bihari Jai Ho Radha Madhava Kunna Bihari Gopi Jana Malabha Hiri Badadati Gopi Jana Malabha Hiri Badadati Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tirabana Chadri Yamuna Tera Vanachati Jai Huradam Madhuva Kunda Bihari Jai Huradam Madhuva Kunda Bihari Gopi Jana Balabha Kiri Baladhari Gopi Jana Balabha Giri Baladhati Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachati Yamuna Tira Vanachati Jai Hurat Homadhava Kunda Bihari Jai Radho Madhuva Kunda Bihari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paravidagacharya also Teta Sitashi Shimad His Divine Grace Abhaya Charanada Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sai Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shidwaita Gadadha Shiva Siddhi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radhakrishna Gopi Gopinath Shyam Kun Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavanam Ki Jai Mathuranam Ki Jai Jagannath Swami Ki Jai Yamunamai Ki Jai Srimati Lasi Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bol All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is to Shri Guru and Gauranga Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bol. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Budale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pajarni Nivashesha Shunyavadi Paschatcha Dejatarani. So before beginning class, I just want to mention today is the commemoration of disappearance day of Govinda Ghosh, who is one of the famous Ghosh brothers who chanted for Lord Chaitanya's kirtan. And there's more information about him and his brothers in the book there about the lives of the saints. So we're going on to the Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, 24th chapter, text 19. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. Ajiv Vyai Kataram Bhavam Yas Tu Anyam Upajivati Na Tasmad Vindate Kshemam Jadan Nare Asati Yatha Ajivyai Kataram Bhavaham Yastvanyam Upajivate Natasmad Vindate Kshemam Jaranari Yasati Yata Ajivyai Katarang Bhavam Yastvanyam Upajivate Natasmad Vindate Kshemam Jaranarya Satiyata Ajivyai Katarang Bhavam Yastvanyam Upajivate Natasmad Vindate Kshemam Jaranarya Satiyata. Okay. Ajivya, sustaining his life. Ekataram, one. Bhavam, entity. Yaha, who. Two, but. Anyam, another. Upajivati, resorts to. Na, not. Tasmat, from that one. Vindate, gains. Kshemam, real benefit. Sorry. Jarat, from a paramour, nari, a woman, asati, who is unchaste, yata, as. Translation: if one thing is actually sustaining our life, but we take shelter of something else, how can we achieve any real benefit? We would be like an unfaithful woman who can never achieve any actual benefit by consorting with her paramour. So you can repeat. If one thing is actually sustaining our life, but we take shelter of something else, how can we achieve any real benefit? We would be like an unfaithful woman who can never achieve any actual benefit by consorting with her paramour. It's interesting, the word para sometimes means transcendental, but it means other. Amor, of course, that's French, actually from the Latin, meaning love. So, actually, it means more than just love. It's not friendly love. It means something other type of love, which I can't mention, being a sannyasi. So, purport by the servants of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, the word kshemam means actual prosperity, not merely the accumulation of money. Here, Lord Krishna boldly argues that just as a woman can never achieve actual dignity or enlightenment from an illicit lover, the residents of Vrindavan will never be happy by neglecting the real source of their prosperity and worshiping Indra instead. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, the audacity that child Krishna displayed before his father and other elders should be understood as an exhibition of transcendental anger aroused when he saw his eternal devotees worshiping an insignificant demigod. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in a very short commentary, says, in this verse he speaks of the effects of not doing as he advises. And Jiva Goswami further elaborates, if we sustain our life by one means, but try to subsist, what happened? Try to subsist by another means, we gain no benefit. We are like an unchaste woman trying to derive happiness from a paramour. Instead of jarat, sometimes jaram is seen. But the meaning is the same. Speaking in this manner to his father and others is audacious, produced by anger at their inferior worship. And Sanatana Goswami pretty much says the same thing, except he adds, instead we should worship Govardhan because it supports the cows. We should worship the cows, and worshiping Indra is rejected. And the conclusion is that we should reject the worship of Indra. Anyway, so let's go back to the verse. Ajivyai katanham bhavam yastvam yam upajivate tasmat vindate kshemam jaranare asatiyata. Okay. So Omagana Timidanda Shah Galanjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmeditam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So today's class is about how to achieve supernatural power. I thought I'd speak about supernatural power. So it's going to be in relationship to the verse, don't worry. I'm not going to just go off on a tangent. So here we see the residents of Vrindavan's going to worship Indra, or a proposal to worship Indra, is compared to an unchaste lady. Now this is a very much used comparison, actually all over the Vedic literatures. So let's try to understand why this comparison is used. But before that, we're going to give some examples of chaste ladies. And we're not going to give examples of unchaste ladies, because that's not a sannyasi's business. But let's talk about, the chaste ladies are glorified. And then we're going to talk about what chastity is, and then we're going to talk about chastity, what chastity is for ladies and men and boys and girls and all human beings, okay? So, anyway, so there's so many nice stories about chaste ladies in the Vedic literatures. Some of them come to mind. One is the famous story of Savitri and Satyavan. I'll tell that story really quickly because it's a long story. Once upon a time, there was a king who was called the controller of horses. It's called Ashwapati in Sanskrit. And he wanted a son, and he prayed to the demigods, particularly Savitri, who was married to Lord Brahma, and she blessed him with a daughter instead. So he was thinking, I got to get her married, and to make a long story short, he couldn't find a husband for her, and so she went out herself and found someone, and his name was Satyavan. And she came back, said, I've chosen Satyavan. She hadn't been married at that particular juncture. And Narada Muni happened to be there at that particular point, and he said, he's really good, he's really qualified, but it's a bad choice. And the king asked, Ashwapati, asked, why is it a bad choice? And Narada Muni said, because he's supposed to die in a year from now. You know, you don't want to get married to someone who's going to die in a year. What's the use of such a marriage? But she was completely dedicated to Satyavan. Her mind was fixed on Satyavan. So she said, I'm getting married to him. And so we're talking about supernatural power. This phrase, supernatural power, is a phrase coming from Prabhupada's books about chaste women. It's not something that I made up. So what happens? She goes to him, and he's living in the forest. The reason he's living in the forest is that his father was a king, or is a king. His name was Jumatsena. And Jumatsena had been kicked out of his kingdom because he was blind, and his prime minister just, kicked him out. Okay. And he was living in the forest. So she went into the forest with Satyavan. They got happily married. And she was serving him very nicely, very, very chaste. And she was also counting down the days to when he was supposed to die, because she knew exactly the day he was supposed to die. So, 365, 364, 363, like Christmas. How many days of Christmas? I don't need my glasses. Or maybe I do need my glasses. Anyway, so she was counting down the days, and then 3 days before he was supposed to die, she said to him, I want to go to the forest with you, and he was going to chop some firewood. And so she went for 3 days, and on the 3rd day, he had a heart attack. And he died with his head on her lap. And so what she saw at that point was that Yamaraj, now normally Yamaraj doesn't come just for people, any ordinary Joe or Sally, or, of course, nowadays people don't use those names anymore. So anyway, so she saw Yamaraj, and that was because of her piety. Yamaraj was directly coming, and with his noose of Varuna, he pulled the soul out of the body. The soul was little tiny, but bright as the sun. And he was walking, and she followed him. I guess Yamaraj does more than walk. He probably flies, too. But anyway, she was following him. And he said, go back, lady. You're not getting him back. And she said, I have already followed you 7 steps. This is a Vedic tradition. If you walk 7 steps with someone, that's a relationship. Just be careful who you walk 7 steps with. So they had a discussion, and she said, I just want to talk philosophy with you. I'm not asking for him back. I just want a philosophical discussion. And so she pleased him with one philosophical question or statement after another, and he gave her different benedictions. One benediction was that her father would get his sight back, that her father would get his kingdom back. That's another benediction. That Savitri's father, who was Ashvapati, he would have 100 sons. And so, Yamaraj was getting tired of this lady after a while. He said, all right, give you benedictions, go back. And, she pleased him again. I just want one more benediction. And Yamaraj at this point, he was fried. And he says to her, okay, one more, but you can't have your husband back. She said, I'm not asking for my husband back. Don't worry. And she says, I want to have 100 sons by my husband. And Yamaraj said, oh my God, she tricked me. So anyway, she was it's a great story. I love this story. She was able to get her husband back, and they lived for 400 years. She got the benediction that she could live for 400 years. So, other stories too, I can go down the line with these stories, like in the Markandeya Purana, you have this lady who stopped the rising of the sun because her husband happened to touch Markandeya Rishi, and her husband had leprosy, and Markandeya Rishi cursed her husband to die before the rising of the sun the next day. And so she stopped the rising of the sun, and so many pastimes occurred as a result of that by her chastity. And then there's the story of Draupadi, who was so chaste that Krishna supplied the unlimited sari for her when there was the attempted disrobing. There's an amazing story of Sukanya and Chaivana Muni. That's an interesting story. So, once upon a time, as the story goes, Sukanya was with her father, Saryati, and her father was a king, and they were visiting the hermitage of Chaivana Muni, and Chaivana Muni could not be seen anywhere. And so he just left her to play around, and she saw two shining objects, and actually these objects were the eyes of Chaivana Muni, who was underground meditating. But the reason they were shining was he was looking at her. He was attracted to her. So you got to be careful if you're walking around the grounds here and you see some lady sees like two lights coming from the ground. Stay away from them. Anyway, so he was looking at her, and she just thought, they're just like shiny little things, and she just took a little twig and poked at him. And so then all the king's horses and all the king's men had constipation at that point. That's from the Bhagavatam. Don't blame me for this story. And so they, and that's pretty painful. And so that would have been their destruction. And the king understood something or someone has offended the sage. And so by that time the sage had come out of the earth. And he went to the sage, and the sage kept looking at the girl. Whatever. And then the king got the idea, well, I guess you want to marry my daughter. But the problem was that the sage was actually quite old and wrinkly like anything. Basically old. And then another problem with being old is that you really have a temper. You're really intolerant. Just like, I see the garden out there and I just, ah! Well, I don't think I'm that old yet. Anyway, so you get, Prabhupada actually said that, but Prabhupada, it was just joking. Prabhupada was joking. He said he actually ascribed that his chastising his disciples was because he was an old man. But he actually wasn't, because he's completely in control of his senses. So anyway, so she gets to marry this old duffer, old sage. And she's married to him, and she stays with him, and she tolerates. Phew. I don't think I could tolerate it. Anyway, so then one day, the Ashwini Kumaras come they're the twin physicians from the heavenly planets. They come to the sage, and they say, hey, we'd like to get some somaras. And the sage says, let's make a deal. So even there's a Vaishya tendency that the sages have, which is interesting. He said, you make me young so I can please my wife, and I'll give you the somaras. So he does this fire sacrifice, and the Ashwini Kumars get the somaras. Indra gets very upset because Ashwini Kumars are not supposed to have the somaras, but the sage is so powerful that he's able to paralyze Indra's arm as Indra's getting ready to fire the thunderbolt. There's Indra in this story too. And then what happens is that the Ashwini Kumars grab him and they walk into this lake. I guess it's the fountain of youth that Ponce de Leon tried to find when he went to Florida. So they walk into this lake of everlasting youth, and then they come out as beautiful young men. I mean, completely fresh, beautiful body. Pretty ecstatic, isn't it? If someone tells me where that lake is, I'm going there. So anyway, so they went into there, and she couldn't really determine which one was her husband. And then she took shelter of the Ashwini Kumars. In other words, her chastity. This is the story, chastity. And then she took shelter of her, the Ashwini Kumars, and they said, this is your husband. And she was so happy she got a brand new, well, not brand new husband, brand new body for her husband by her chastity. This is really interesting. Of course, later on, her father came by, found her with this young man, and said, you are a rascal, basically, because you have actually done something horrible. You've given up your good husband for this young whippersnapper. Of course, he didn't use those words. And she proudly says, no, this is my husband. And so anyway, so there's so many stories about chastity. Gandhari became very powerful, right? Because she actually bound her eyes, just not to be better than her husband. So, see, all right, so I'll stop telling these stories because I don't want to aggravate all the ladies in class. So you may say, wow, this is really chauvinistic. Ladies, chastity, behave yourselves, stay in the kitchen, all that other nice stuff. But that's not really the point. The reason these stories are told is that it's very easy for people in that particular culture to relate to. But the reason they're actually told is to teach a higher lesson, not simply to convince all the ladies to behave yourselves. Because sometimes people take these stories out of context and they tell their wife, well, you should be like Savitri, or you should be like Sita Devi. Of course, unfortunately, the man, he wants a wife like Sita Devi, and he's like Ravan. It's interesting. It's like called the half a hen logic. That you want the part of the hen that lays the golden eggs, but you don't want the part of the hen that eats. So in other words, the man has to be like Ram, too. Prabhupada actually said, as far as household life is concerned, and that's not today's topic, that if the husband and wife don't argue, the goddess of fortune is always there. In other words, there's happiness in the family. Because happiness comes, it's not necessarily goddess of fortune refers to money, but happiness actually comes when there's good, congenial, loving relationships between people. Like there was one study a number of years ago that determined where are people happiest in the world. Of course, Denmark was one of the main places. But also some of the countries you would never consider, what we would call third world countries where people are living in villages and what we would consider like horrible conditions, because they were surrounded by their family members, extended family members. As Prabhupada would often say, what society, friendship, and love divinely bestowed upon man by God, right? So that's happiness. So anyway, getting back to the point, Ram and Sita, like that. Getting back to the point is the message that's being taught is one. We use the word chastity, which is really a good word, but also let's use a word that we can more easily relate to, which is loyalty. Loyalty. And of course, this is brought out using the same example of a chaste, or analogy of a chaste woman in the fourth canto in the Puranjana story, which you're all familiar with, where there's a chaste wife, Malayadwaja, who is meditating on her husband at the time of leaving the body. She's very, very chaste. And this is taken as an analogical story indicating that's the dedication a disciple has to have for the spiritual master. The dedication. And therefore, when that happens, in the fourth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, it says the super soul appears before such a person. When one is actually dedicated, and Prabhupada talks about when the spiritual master leaves the planet, one is actually dedicated to the mission of the spiritual master, then he associates with the Supreme Personality of Godhead directly. That's interesting. So, that's in the Bhagavatam. However, let's take a practical, what we say, modern day example of that. Of course, the best example is my primary role model, which is Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who is completely chaste, let's use that word, chaste, loyal, dedicated to His Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, right? Oftentimes I talk about this, like how can you determine that Prabhupada was, let's say, the most dedicated disciple of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur? How do you determine that Prabhupada was the one that was specifically empowered by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? You could say, well, you could determine it by the external manifestations, that, Prabhupada saved the world, or Prabhupada went all over the world and got the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra in every town and village according to the prediction by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But really, the point is his dedication to the order of his spiritual master, even at the risk, right, of his own life. To me, that is the epitome of chastity. Even though in the Vedic literatures you have women used as examples, this particular point of chastity, dedication, loyalty is applicable to everyone. And Srila Prabhupada also corroborates this in his books. He says the woman becomes chaste, and a man becomes chaste too by following, and probably use the word brahmachari, but everyone's meant to be a brahmachari in that sense. Brahmachari is a vow. The brahmachari life is a life of chastity, because you have the statement in the Bhagavatam about what brahmachari means, what brahmachari, what gurukule, vasandanta, gurur hitam, which is a really interesting point. Let's just concentrate on that one statement, gurur hitam. The other ones, brahmachari makes his place of residence, or a devotee, let's just widen that. A devotee makes his place of residence the place of the spiritual master. In other words, even if one lives in a house, because Prabhupada would often say that our grahastas are brahmacharis too, when they're following the principles and dedicated to Krishna consciousness. So that's brahmachari or brahmacharini, gurukule, vasandanta gurur hitam. They learn to control their senses, but even more important is gurur hitam, which basically means working for the benefit of Guru. And of course, Guru's benefit is none different than the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's not different. If it's different, he is a bogus Guru, if that term can be used. A bogus Guru. If his activity, life, and everything is different from the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So anyway, so there's all these examples, and even using the chaste woman in this is not meant to be limited to one particular gender. That all of us are meant to be loyal and chaste. And you see the gopis are the most chaste to Krishna. And they're also, you may say they're unchaste to their husbands. But actually their husbands are expansions of Krishna, and they never even touched their husbands. And their actual husband is Krishna, because Krishna was the one who stole their clothes and became married to them at that particular juncture. And so it's just illusory marriages. But they're so chaste. There's the whole story in the writings of the acharyas that of the testing the chastity of Radharani, who's the most chaste lady. The most chaste lady must be able to cure Krishna's headache by bringing water in a pot that has 1,000 holes in it across the Yamuna River, walking on a bridge made of Krishna's hair or something like that. So that must be the most chaste lady. And so what happened is that even Kutila, I don't think Jatila tried it, I think Kutila tried it. Kutila tried it, she fell right into the water, and someone had to rescue her from being drowned. And then Radharani was able to do that. So you see, of course that's Radharani. She's, anyway, Adi Shakti of the Lord, Ladini Shakti of the Lord, special. Can't compare. But the point is that one becomes very powerful by being very loyal and chaste to Krishna and the spiritual master. And the example, of course, we mentioned that Prabhupada was very chaste to his spiritual master. So the example of supernatural power is Prabhupada. Prabhupada manifested supernatural power by being able to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. And when Prabhupada's disciples got very dedicated to Prabhupada in certain instances, I'm not saying we're always dedicated, I wish we were. Like when Prabhupada asked the devotees to do what? Produce 17 books in 2 months. They were able to have supernatural power. Actually, I was part of that group. I can't say that I had supernatural power. But at least I was able to observe how my God brothers and God sisters manifested supernatural power by their dedication like that. So this particular verse we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam is a criticism that Krishna is giving of Indra, or the worship of Indra. Why not worship those things which we have a relationship to? Why not be chaste with those things that we have a relationship to? And he's using the example that if you do that, then you'll always be protected and maintained. And that's actually 2 of the surrendering principles mentioned by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That, of course, the first 2 are accept everything favorable, then what? To reject everything unfavorable. Then after that is to understand the Lord is always maintaining you, the Lord is always protecting you. And then to have, these are actually principles of chastity. It's really interesting. I just thought of that. It didn't come to my mind before. Accept everything favorable, reject everything unfavorable. Understand the Lord is always protecting you. Understand He's always maintaining you. To have no separate interests other than the interests of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And always be, there's the hardest one for me, meek and humble. Anyway, so see, these are some of the points I got from this verse and its references and its analogical reference to chaste ladies. So any questions or comments? Or arguments?
What's the best way to cultivate not having a separate interest from the Lord?
Associate with those who don't have a separate interest from the Lord. By associating with Prabhupada through his books, associating with devotees who are advanced in devotional service and dedicated. And I remember, I'm not saying I'm advanced or dedicated, but I remember associating with Jayananda. You know Jayananda. And, I was in the kitchen with him preparing for, it wasn't Rath Yatra, it was I think it was the Lord Chaitanya festival that I was preparing for. And it was like 8 o'clock at night, and I was getting tired, which happens. And he was just going full steam ahead and dedicated and absorbed in serving Prabhupada. And in spite of not having so much Shastric knowledge, everybody knows that Jayananda, basically he would give the same class again and again about, you got to have faith in the holy names, you got to be attached to Prabhupada, basically things like that. And by that association, at least temporarily, by that association, I became humble temporarily. I became humble, I just thought, wow, here's such a great devotee. And I said, this is how I should, he's one of my role models in addition to Prabhupada. I think by role models, so you see someone like Jayananda, you see, of course, Prabhupada ultimately, Jayananda and other God brothers, like Bhaktitirtha Maharaj and others who are sources of inspiration. Okay. I hope that wasn't a sexist class. song. You may recognize the song. Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Vadan Moe Savadana Mate Vadan Moe Savadana Yakara Prasade Pai He Bhavatori Ayahay Krishna Prapte Ayavo Oite Krishna Prapte Ayavo Padma Bhakya Jitete Korea Vaidya Arana Korea Mane Asa Arana Korea Mane Asa Charane Rate Eseu Dhammagate Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Asara Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Janme lo ye janme Prabhu say Vegan rede prakat seta Vegan rede prakat seta Prema bhakti avoite avityavanasa yate Prema bhakti avoite avityavanasa yate Vede Gaya Rachareta Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Agamajanara Bandhu Lokanath Lokera Divana Prabhu Purodaya Dehamore Padachaya Heveyat Kutsutri Bhuvana Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya 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 Prabhupada Namo Vishnu Padaya. Get this. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Samaniti Namane Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Samaniti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauramani Pracharine Nivitse Satsanya Bhari Asyachare Satarine Namaste Deve Gauramani Pracharine Nivitse Satsanya Bhari Asyachare Satarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shiva Sati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shiva Sati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shiva Sati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shiva Sati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 looking at the Radha, looking at the Radha. Jaya Radha, looking at the Radha, looking at the Radha. Jaya Radha, Radhe, Radhe. Jaya Radhe, Radhe, Radhe. Jaya Radhe, 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 Radhe. Jaya Sri Radhe. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhacharya Ausuteda Satashi Shimad, His Divine Grace Abhaya Charananda Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Shitway the Gadadha Shivasati Gaur Bhakta